Hi, this is Aaron with Vanishing Cabinets, and in this video I will be building some extended upper kitchen cabinets with plexiglass doors start to finish, along with adding some fresh paint and LED lighting. So grab some popcorn and enjoy the show.
Yeah, the plan is fill the cabinets above to the ceiling. So the boxes on top of the existing cabinets, crown along the top, we'd have matching doors, frosted plexiglass, and then lighting inside the cabinets.
Okay, you have to find a new spot for that artwork. Cool. Alright. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes total. Yes, Dave and I did talk about adding these cabinets over a year ago, but you know, life gets in the way sometimes, but now the time has come and it's going to be glorious. I actually really like the look of those upper cabinets with glass doors going all the way to the ceiling, so I was really excited for the chance to build these. Dave already has a beautiful kitchen, and I wanted to make sure that these will complement the space and not make it look like some cheap DIY kitchen. The first step was to build some cabinet boxes, so I started out by ripping down some 3/4 inch maple plywood with my track saw and cutting out the lengths of the panels on the miter saw. I then ran the panels through on the table saw just to make sure they all had a consistent width. And there are a million ways to assemble cabinet boxes, but in my experience I found that the dado grooves are great and they really help to keep things consistent, so I cut those out on here using a dado stack on the table saw. I use a gauge block to set the height of the dado stack at 3/8 of an inch, which is the depth of these grooves. I made 3 cuts total on the side panels, 2 for the top and bottom boards, and a rabbet along the back edge for the back panel to sit in, which was 1/2 inch wide. So I just used a sacrificial fence to expose only 1/2 inch of the cutters, thus saving time changing out some of the blades. The face frame is going to be about 1.5 inches wide, so the distance of the groove to the edge of the board is just slightly less than that. So that way when the frames do get mounted on here, the bottom boards are going to sit about 1/8 inch below the edge of the frame. And I'm using 1/2 inch for the back panels, really just for cost savings, since the back panels are a lot of surface area, and less material here isn't really going to compromise the structural integrity. And I also ended up adding a couple grooves onto the back panel as well at 1/4 inch depth, just to help with the alignment later on. When it comes to assembly, this is where all the hard work adding the dados pays off. It's basically just putting together some Lincoln logs using glue and brad nails. You could also use some larger clamps instead of nails, but the nails just make it so much faster and simple enough to go back and fill the holes with filler for any exposed holes. And for once in my woodworking career, I can say that these came out flawless. The top and bottom pieces came out perfectly aligned to the front edges of the side panels with a nice snug fit along those grooves.
Yeah! Look what I have created!
I followed the same process for all the boxes here, and this being one of my first times building cabinets for somebody else, got kind of nerve-wracking, because these are going to be hard to change once that glue dries. And usually since I'm building things for my own house, I have the opportunity to test fit things 100 times during this process, but sometimes you just gotta trust the measurements you took and have faith in the woodworking gods. Not bad, eh? Not bad. Even though I was pretty confident these were going to fit just fine, I thought it'd be a good idea just to throw them in the car and take them over to Dave's for a quick test fit. It's like a 1/16 of an inch long. What do you think?
See, it's starting to come together.
Initially, we had planned on putting a cabinet box in this small space above the fridge, but we were worried about the doors being too small and looking kind of weird, so we came up with another solution later in the video that I think came out really cool. So I just finished test fitting these boxes, and for the most part they fit just fine except for one spot, which I need to basically make this box a little bit shorter. So my idea is to see if I can trim off some of this with the hand plane. We'll see how it goes. That's like smooth too. So it took off a full 1/8 of an inch. That's all I needed. I gotta be honest, that worked way better than I thought it would. Those electric hand planes can be pretty unwieldy, but it actually worked perfectly, so I was pretty pleased with that. The next major step was to build the face frames. I'm going with maple hardwood to make these, and I started by ripping down larger boards into strips and then planing down those strips to 3/4 inch. They had been skip planed by my hardwood supplier already, so they already had one smooth side to reference. To assemble the frames, I'm using the trusty Festool Domino, which still holds the prestigious title of the most expensive tool in the shop. Will it ever be topped? Only time will tell. The ultimate goal of this build is to add on these top cabinets in a way that makes them look like they're part of the original build. And one thing that's really going to help with that is that we're going to be painting the existing cabinets along with these new ones all the same color. And since the existing ones were stained, it really would have been a challenge to match the stain and the grain. But thankfully we're not going down that road, so the idea with the face frames is to simply match the frame dimensions on the existing cabinets and just modifying the height. One small customization I made on these is to add an extra inch of material along the top of the frames, and this will serve as a nailing board for the crown molding that's going to be mounted along the top of these. Here's the goal for today. I need to replicate these doors. So the steps I'm thinking I'm gonna have to do, I need to rip down my wood to this width. I need to plane it down to the thickness of this, which is slightly less than 3/4 of an inch. And then route out the inside edge for the groove for the glass door. And then also route out this outside edge thumbnail profile. Hands down, the doors are going to be the trickiest part of this build, just because there are several steps involved and require a pretty high level of precision, and not to mention I need to get them to match the existing doors as close as possible. Just as a reminder, the panels are going to be made out of plexiglass, so I'm just focusing on the door frames, which will be made out of maple wood. The initial steps are going to be the same as the face frames, just ripping down the boards and jointing and planing them down to their final thickness. I just want to talk about measurements for a second because they can get pretty involved for door parts. If this is the face frame of the cabinet box and the door is going to be a partial overlay, which is where the door is going to be sitting on top of the frame, you'll want to know how much that overlay is, which is 1/2 inch in my case. Partial overlay doors are pretty common in kitchens, so I'm going to start with my frame opening measurements and add 1/2 inch to all sides. The opening here is 12 by 18, so the final door will be 13 by 19. The vertical pieces or stiles will measure the 13-inch height. And for the rails, I'll start by taking the final 19-inch length less the width of the two stiles, and then I need to add back the length needed for the tongues on each side that are going to sit in those grooves after I route out all the edges. So in my case, the groove depth is 5/8 of an inch on each side, added back onto the starting point for a final length of 16 1/4 inch for the stiles. I picked up these Freud glass panel router bits, and these are going to be the secret sauce for the doors. They're going to help with the alignment of the rails and stiles, and also adds these little grooves on the backside that'll hold rubber inserts that'll hold the glass doors in place. And initially I was really excited to get to work using these bits, but what transpired afterwards can only be described as Murphy's Law incarnate. Dude, just move. What is this table? I won't go into all the grueling details of the challenges I face, but let's just say that I need to get better at operating this router table. But eventually I persevered and got everything set up properly. I ran one side of each of the boards through to get the grooves routed out, and for the rails I routed out the two edges with this matching router bit. And I use this rail coping sled again, which honestly is worth every penny. Really helps keep the boards nice and secure when you run them through. Assembling the doors is again really reliant on all the work prior to this. Specifically all the work with the router, because in order for the doors to glue up nice and align, the board router profiles need to be consistent and line up exactly. I mean, honestly, the margin for error here is basically zero. I mean, even if the boards were misaligned by a 32nd of an inch, I do think you would notice. It's really important to take your time with test pieces during the router step and just get everything as close as you can get it. If all is good, then this step is really as simple as adding glue into the joints, lining everything up, and then tightening the clamps. And I'm using parallel clamps and bar clamps here, which either will work, but I do think they're going to be required to make sure you get that even clamping pressure. I mentioned earlier that we decided against adding a cabinet box in that space above the fridge because of how tight it was. So instead I thought it would be a cool idea to have basically a light box in that space without doors, just a face frame with plexiglass. And instead of one big window, I ended up making the frame with 3 strip openings here to give the box a kind of modern look. And I made this using all the same router bits that I use when making the cabinet doors. After the doors were assembled, I just added this round over to all the outside edges with the bit sitting just slightly proud of the table to add that thumbnail detail. I'd like to say that the frames and doors came out perfect and ready to install after the glue up, but that's just not how this stuff goes. And it's this detailed cleanup work that really makes a difference in how nice things look. So in order to get these looking as nice as I can, I'm going to go back and fill any remaining gaps in the joints with wood filler, chisel off any excess glue and lips on the joints, and finally finishing off everything with 180 grit sanding. And I'm sanding the fronts, backs, and inside edges, except for the backs of the face frames, which won't need it since you're never going to see them. And in case you were wondering, I'm using the Festool ETS 125 sander, which leaves a great finish, and the dust collection is phenomenal.
Bruce. It's okay. You'll be okay.
After about 6 hours of this, my hands were nice and numb with potential nerve damage from all that vibration. After getting all the doors cleaned up, I drilled out some hinge holes with a Forstner bit and a Kreg hinge jig. For the hardware, we decided to go with barrel handles just to match the other cabinets, only a couple inches shorter. I've seen people go with knobs on these, but overall I thought the look of the handles is just a little sharper. And so here I'm just using a handle hardware jig that really helps to get the holes drilled out consistently and accurately. And I also just put some painter's tape on the back to help with some of the tear out. And next I got to work on the light box. I cut out the side panels from some plywood and also cut out some stretchers with scrap plywood and assembled everything simply with just some glue and nails. I made it kind of skinny since the only exposed edge is about 3 inches deep, so there wouldn't be much use to making it extend all the way to the back of the wall. Plus, it's going to be so lightweight that I'm not going to have to screw it into the studs. I mentioned earlier that we were painting the existing cabinets as well as the new ones, so to prep the old ones, I cleaned them with a degreaser and then dulled the varnish with a 220 grit sanding sponge, which did wonders for building up my forearm strength. After sanding, I vacuumed everything and then gave all the doors and frames a wipe down with a tack cloth. And I'm using every square inch I have available in the shop to do this all in one go. Jeez, that's a lot of crap. The primer and top coat are going to be the Benjamin Moore Advanced line with a satin finish. I'm using the Graco X5 sprayer, and here are a few tips I've learned on spraying paint after losing a couple years of my life from painting stresses. Tip 1. Make sure you have the right size spray tip. I err on the side of smaller with less spray. Tip 2. Make sure you thoroughly clean your tips with solvent and a brush. Tip 3. Increase the spray pressure to get rid of the tails. And my final and best tip, just hire somebody to paint. I managed to do all this without making a mess. The panels for the newly created doors are made from 1/8 inch plexiglass, and we chose one side to be frosted. And what's nice about plexiglass is it's really easy to cut. I'm using a saw blade made for cutting plastics, but I've used some other higher tooth fine finish blades that seem to work just fine. I'm keeping the plexiglass in place with these rubber inserts that sit on that routed channel just behind the lip where the panel is sitting. And this stuff is super easy to use and secures the panels in great. And I also added the plexiglass into the lightbox face frame in 3 separate 2-inch strips. Final step here was just to screw in the hardware using the holes that I pre-drilled earlier. The time has finally come to get this bad boy installed. And the first step was to work out the wiring for the lights. We could run most of the wire right through the boxes, but there was one gap over the cooktop where we had to run the wire through the ceiling. There were those that doubted this was even possible, but hey, haters gonna hate.
Well, we got it.
Miracles do happen.
We elected to hide the power supplies in the cabinet above the fridge, running 2 separate circuits, one for the upper cabinets and one for the upper cabinets. That way they could be controlled separately. The dimmer switches were mounted on the underside of the upper cabinets with double-sided tape.
This wall, it's buried all the way back here. And as I work over, it starts to come out, so the wall is like this.
As Dave's dad reminded us, never trust that your walls are going to be square. So to square the new cabinets up as best as possible with the existing cabinets, we used shims and screwed the boxes into the studs after a lot of trial and error and playing with it. I located where the studs were ahead of time using a stud finder and marked with some tape, and then used a laser level to run the line down from the tape into the box where I drilled the holes. And after all that, I still managed to miss the studs about half the time. As far as running the wire for the lights, I drilled 1/2-inch holes into the sides, tops, and bottoms of the boxes where necessary. I do put a lot of effort into these videos, and at this point I'm just going to ask that if you found this video helpful or entertaining at all up till now, do me a huge favor and hit the like button. And for those lucky few who haven't subscribed to the channel yet,
well, think about it, you know?
To make the LEDs more diffuse, they're going to sit in an aluminum channel with a plastic frosted cover, and I just mounted some brackets in here to hold the channels in each box. Next, it was time to get to work on the face frames. I joined the frames together prior to mounting them in place using a couple face frame clamps, which basically hold the frames aligned while you screw them together. I mounted the frames to the boxes using some brad nails, and they didn't quite align perfectly to the existing cabinets, so there were some spots where I had to put small bits of cardboard as shims where necessary, and it'll be really important to get some trim up to hide that imperfect seam where the new frames meet up with the old frames. Once the frames were on, it was time to mount the doors. I made a reference mark for the 1/2-inch overlay just under the opening and lined up the door to the mark. And the horizontal overlay is taken care of basically by the hinges after making sure to buy 1/2-inch overlay hinges. I used a laser level to reference for level and made any adjustments to the hinges accordingly. Also, my footage of this got corrupted for audio, so to go above and beyond for my fans, this guitar is being played by yours truly, written specifically with cabinet door hanging in mind, so please enjoy. The light box over the fridge was next, and it was a little tricky in that we had to run the LEDs in the box prior to mounting the frame, since there's no hinge door like the other cabinets. We ended up running the strip along the bottom facing upwards since it gave a more even light, and I also added some 1/4-inch plywood on the back and top just to help with the light reflection. After getting the face frame on, it was finally time to get started with the dreaded crown molding. This was actually my first time working with crown molding, and it was perplexing to say the least, because you can't be thinking in 2 dimensions, you gotta be thinking in 4 dimensions. After much trial and error, the best tips I can offer are to cut your miters with the board flipped upside down and in its final 45-degree position as to not have to calculate any compound angles. This part of the install actually took more time than the rest of the install combined, including having to scrap an entire stock of cuts. But this one was on me. I was marking and cutting my boards on the front face, and I should have been marking the backs of them since this is the part that's actually making contact with the cabinets, so all my boards came out a little bit too short on the first try. However, on the second go round, it came together perfectly.
Jesus Christ, it's bad. This corner, I mean, I don't know.
Another important factor is the angle of the cabinet corners, and if they aren't square, there are going to be problems since I made all my cuts at 45. I will appeal to the experience of the viewers here. What is the secret to getting perfect crown molding joints? Please let me know in the comments. I would have loved to have not needed caulk in my crown joints, but who are we kidding? Of course I needed this. And say what you will about caulk, it really makes molding look nicer in my opinion, especially when you're going to be painting. When it comes to LEDs, this is my jam. The most important part of any install is the connections between the strips. Ideally, you have longer runs where possible, but for something like cabinets, each cabinet is going to need its own separate strip. Always make sure you have the right kind of connectors for your specific LED strip, taking into considerations the height of the strip, the number of pins, the thickness of the strip sometimes, and the strip to wire combo. If done with the right equipment, it really is as simple as cutting the strips down to size with scissors and adding your connectors where necessary and doing your best to hide the wire. The channel with the frosted diffuser, while not required, really elevates the look of LEDs, so I would always recommend having some version of this or a diffuser on the strip itself. Okay, the very last step in this install was just touching up the paint with a foam brush after filling in all the nail holes with spackle. And with that, the cabinets were done. Big thanks to Dave and Sarah for giving me the opportunity to build these, and huge thanks to Dave's dad for all his help in making these come together. And thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.